Director of the Rear Center for Immigrant Culture and History, and I am so happy to welcome you to tonight's presentation of the History Alliance of Kingston. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the History Alliance, and then we're going to introduce our members and then get started with our program for tonight, which is the Black History of the Hudson Valley Collaborative Research Project. So the History Alliance of Kingston is a collaboration of local history institutions and historians who began working together in June. We realized we weren't going to be able to open our doors to the public this season, and we saw it as an opportunity to get to know each other and to come up with fun ways to continue presenting local history to the public and to community members. So our first two projects were the Hudson Valley History Hunts. The first one explored the Pincocky neighborhood of Kingston, and the second sends visitors searching for the graves of diverse Kingstonians buried at Montrepose Cemetery. You can still participate in both of those hunts. You can find the clues by visiting our website, which is historyallianceofkingston.com. Since we liked working together so much and realized how much we could all learn, we decided to keep going. So we defined our mission, which you can see here on this slide, to bring local history to life for people of all ages through events and activities that reflect and promote a deeper understanding of the diverse social and cultural history of the Hudson Valley. And we decided to take on two sort of separate projects to break into subcommittees. So one group is working on public-facing projects, and part of that effort is a bi-weekly column in the Kingston Wire featuring local history research, stories, and events. So we encourage you to check us out there at the Kingston Wire. And then the second group is the history group, which is working to share research and resources that will strengthen all of our understanding of local history. So what you're going to see tonight is a collaboration of both of these groups and the initial stages of our first real collaborative research history project. So without further ado, I am going to introduce the members of the organization to introduce themselves. Next slide.
Hi, everybody. I'm Troy Ellen Dixon, Marketing and Program Director at the African Roots Center, where we uplift the history and culture of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. You can find out more about the African Roots Center at africanrootslibrary.org. Next slide.
And I'm Henry Lowengardt from the Century House Historical Society, which is a historical society based in Rosendale that's educational not-for-profit whose job is to promote the history of the cement industry, which is more important than you would think. And we also caretake the Widow Jane Mine, which is an incredible venue. And so come on down when it's not too snowy. And on to the next slide.
And I am Bill Merchant, the Deputy Director for Collections, Historian and Curator at the D&H Canal Historical Society in High Falls. And we highlight the importance of the Delaware and Hudson Canal and preserve its stories, landscapes, and artifacts. I'm joined here this evening by my excellent colleague, Courtney McNamara.
Hello again, my name is Courtney. I'm the curatorial assistant and also the new video editor at the D&H Canal Historical Society. Next slide, please.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Wasberg-Johnson, Director of Exhibits and Outreach at the Hudson River Maritime Museum. We're located on the Kingston waterfront on the Rondout, just down the road from the Rear Center and the African Roots Center. And we interpret basically anything and everything there is to know about the Hudson River.
And I am from the Rear Center for Immigrant Culture and History. And we are telling the stories of the immigrant and migrant history of the Rondout neighborhood in the Hudson Valley, past and present. Next slide.
Hi, I'm Aaron Robinson. I'm the Historic Site Manager at Senate House State Historic Site. We are part of New York State Parks, and we are dedicated to both preserving and interpreting the history surrounding the first meeting of the New York State Senate, which actually took place in the simple stone home of Abraham Van Gaspee. He was a merchant in the 18th century. Next slide.
Hi, everybody. My name is Taylor Brook, and I'm the archivist for the Ulster County Clerk's Archives and the City of Kingston historian. I'm here tonight with Deputy County Clerk Lori Hancock, and on behalf of Ulster County Clerk Nina Posterpeck, we'd like to thank HAC for including the clerk's office in this project. The mission of the archives is to store, protect, and provide access to the county's historical documents that date all the way back to 1658. We have a brand new website, which is linked here, that you can go to browse our collections and online exhibits, including a new Black History Month exhibit on Henry Rosecrans Jr., who was a Kingston native. He was a barber and one of the first African Americans to play baseball in the United States. It's a really great story, and I hope you guys get a chance to check the website out. And if we can go to the next slide. As a board member of the Friends of Historic Kingston, I would like to thank the History Alliance on behalf of the whole board for including the Friends in this amazing project. The Friends has a great collection of photographs and other Kingston-related treasures that we're really excited to share as part of this collaborative research project. And you can all go to fohk.org to browse some of their digital collections. Thanks again, and I'll kick it back to Sarah.
So just some of the other contributing institutions who couldn't be with us tonight are Theater on the Road, Ulster County Historical Society, Volunteer Firemen's Hall and Museum of Kingston, and maybe you. You can sign up to join us at historyallianceofkingston.com/join-hack. So that's a little bit about who we are, and here's a lovely picture. This has been an entirely Zoom collaboration. We started during the pandemic, and here we are. So next slide asks, why are we doing this project? What is it that we are undertaking here? And I'm going to hand this over to Troy Ellen to give a little bit of the groundwork for how we got to this point.
This community project is building upon the work that has gone before and is ongoing. The research of Radia Harper-Sumler, Myra Young Armstead, A.J. Williams Myers, and so many others. Books in the library collection at and the Real History Series programs presented by the African Roots Center. Reclaiming and uplifting the story around the Pine Street African Burial Ground. The annual conference on Black history in the Hudson Valley, and the community conversations and family collections we don't even know about yet. We know that Black history is American history, but too much of it has been ignored at best, excuse me, or intentionally misrepresented. Black folks contribute to history on a daily basis. We encourage Black folks to contribute to this project with family lore, oral history, letters, photographs, documents, etc., to help build the historical record. But it's not just us who should do this work. White folks should participate to fill the gaps in our knowledge of Black history in the Hudson Valley, the Hudson Valley. Working together, the lack and loss of information because of the way in which past history was collected and recorded or not will not be experienced by future generations.
So as museums and heritage organizations, we recognize that sometimes we have been a barrier to the preservation and interpretation of Black history in our communities. Historically, museums have not always been a welcoming place for everyone. For instance, at the Hudson River Maritime Museum back in the day, we used to literally lock our gates at night. Thankfully, we don't do that anymore, but gatekeeping can be more than literal. We recognize that our institutional priorities may not have included Black history, either through our collecting policies and what artifacts and documents are deemed worthy of research, or sorry, worthy of preservation, our research, or what we choose to publish and exhibit. Even how our collections are cataloged can be an obstacle if Black history is not listed by name. Part of the reason why all our organizations have joined in this effort is to work to correct these past mistakes and overcome these barriers.
Institutions can't expect that communities that they have never forged relationships with will suddenly open up their stories, memories, and artifacts to be collected. So we want to be clear that we're not here today to ask you to donate your families or your community's materials to us. Though if you want to do that, we can certainly discuss it. We're here to start getting to know each other. We want this to be a step in a process of transforming our internal practices, staffs, and boards so that Hudson Valley history institutions can become truly reflective of the communities and populations it's our mission to serve. So we're here to ask Black communities and researchers of Black history of the Hudson Valley what stories are important so that we can point researchers and focus our own research toward the stories and collections that matter. As Troy Ellen said, this is a process that requires buy-in from both institutions and communities. And Bill is going to share now one way that we are proposing to help by creating a collaborative Black history of the Hudson Valley research guide to make sure that those who want to learn more about the Black history of the Hudson Valley can be directed to the right places and people who know it.
So our project goals are to try and open up the attics and the tales, the lore of family lore, collections in other museums, to share what we know, to make it more easy to find what little information there is. If we can all share what bits of this history we can pull out of the spare record, we might eventually create a larger picture that gives us all a better idea of what life was like for these important people whose lives were not recorded in the way that people that look like me were. We hope to identify other collections, to have a spot where researchers can find sources of these hard to find stories. The hope is that through all of this effort, we can tell a much more complete story than we have at this point. With this many organizations as part of the History Alliance of Kingston, I think that the sum of all our parts will hopefully be much greater than what any one of us might have to share. And the next section of our presentation, a few of us will talk about what it is that what the projects we're working on. And coincidentally, we'll start with me. I was fortunate enough back in 2019 to get a small stipend from the Community Foundation. The Ulster County Community Grants funded the Community Foundations of the Hudson Valley. And that grant was not just to concentrate on Black workers in the D&H Canal, but to try and find the stories of all the marginalized populations. And I got to tell you, it's a hard job to do. You're going to see the only 3 pictures that we have in our thousands of pictures that have a picture of a person of color in them. This is just, that's the way it is. And that's what we researchers and historians have to work with. And again, it's why we'd like to see this project broaden out. If we've all got a little bit, I'll show you a little bit more of what I've got here. For instance, in this next slide, you get to see there is a Black canaler. He would be the second guy on the boat. The captain would probably still be on the boat. This happens to be at Lock 16, part of the National Historic Landmark 5 Locks Walk, administered by my organization. That wonderful building right there is the Depew Tavern, which is now the home to the D&H Canal Museum. We've actually moved in, and I work currently out of the basement. It's a nice basement, though, and we're really excited to be able to tell all the stories of the D&H Canal. But I was especially happy to have the chance to try and tease some stories out of the historic record. This actual slide shows you, you're looking north. The next lock after this is 15, right now on the side of Route 213. Then there was a rolling aqueduct after 1850. And then we had the N-word locks. That's right, 3 locks that presumably were named because at some point in time, a person of color operated those locks. Ongoing research will hope to uncover whether that surmise of mine is correct or not. But this is just a sampling of some of the stories we have uncovered. And in the next slide, you'll see Jim Jackson. This is the only picture we have of a Black D&H worker where we know his name. And you've seen the only 3 pictures I've got. And we're lucky because I know of other institutions. It's my understanding the Erie Canal Museum went looking and couldn't find any. So we're hoping that this project will uncover the stories. I'm told that Jim's family still lives in Roundout, and I hope to maybe see what they can tell me about his life. And maybe through these sorts of efforts, we can start to correct this gross injustice on the part of historians and start to learn about what life was like for all Americans. And with that, I'd like to hand this on to Sarah Wasberg Johnson, who'll tell you a little bit about her research at the Maritime Museum.
Thanks, Bill. So over the course of the past year, we've been doing more in-depth research into the history of the steamboat Mary Powell, which is pictured here. And we ran across a couple of references to Black employees who worked aboard the Mary Powell. I've done a couple of blog posts on the first two. Fanny M. Anthony, who was the stewardess of the Mary Powell, the Glee Clubs of the Mary Powell, and Thomas Cornell, which maybe you saw last week on our blog, or a shortened version on the Kingston Wire this morning. And then the final project I'm working on is the Mary Powell Colored Employees Club, which held a series of cakewalks here in Kingston. So like Bill, we don't have a ton of photographs of Black folks and people of color in our collections, but this is one of the few we do have. This is the crew of the steamboat Mary Powell with Fanny M. Anthony over there on the left. It's from the Donald Ringwald collection at the museum. And if I click to the next slide, there she is. This was my first real in-depth research project for the crew of the Mary Powell. And it was delightful because we actually had her full name. I found a newspaper reference that gave her middle initial, which meant I was able to track her down in the census records. And one census record actually said that she was a steamboat stewardess, which was awesome because then I knew for sure that that was exactly her. And she served almost the entire career of the steamboat Mary Powell, which is pretty great. So she's nearly as famous as the Mary Powell herself. If you guys want to visit the Hudson River Maritime Museum's history blog, hrmm.org/history-blog. We've got this one about Fanny Anthony and also about the Glee Clubs up there. But we also have collections where we don't know people in photographs, which is, I'm hoping that this collaborative research project will maybe open up our collections more to people in the community who might recognize people. It's a bit of a long shot because, a lot of our photos are from the 19th century. But just to be able to know more about the people in our collections would be awesome. So I'm going to turn it over to the other Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah. And I want to tell you a little bit about some of the research and stories we've been collecting as a part of our Sewing in Kingston research. And I'm actually going to do it in a slightly different order than what's on this slide. But for the past year and a half, the Rear Center has been working to collect stories of sewing in Kingston for an exhibition that will open in our gallery in the fall. The photograph you see here, which is of Fessenden's shirt factory in 1922, shows a typical image we find of Kingston's 20th century garment factories, a sea of white women's faces. And this job of sewing machine operator was vital to many Europeans and especially Italian and Jewish American families' incomes. It helped to lift them into the middle class, and that's part of the story we're going to tell. But up through the 1960s, few Black Kingston women could secure jobs as sewing machine operators. Rather, they faced job discrimination that meant they were clustered into lower wage positions. Women were often pressers, and men who worked in this industry often worked in maintenance jobs. So this story of exclusion, which is the story that comes about in the archives, if you even look for, right? I mean, the apparent story is that this is a white people's story. If you think about it, there's an exclusion, but that's not the whole story either. And so I want to share two stories of two Black women from Kingston whose careers were outliers, but they show the kind of more complete stories we can tell when we pull together institutional, scholarly, and community resources and knowledge. And so when you go to the next slide, I also just want to thank my co-curator on this exhibition who is here tonight, who is Ward Mintz, and as well as the other board members of the Rear Center. I really appreciate your being here and supporting all of our work on this project. So this woman is Mabel Durham Fuller, and the picture shows her speaking at a union meeting in the 1950s. At that time, she was the head of the education department of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union Local 62. And she represented the union on several international delegations in her long career, which ended in retirement in the 1970s. But back in the 1920s, she struggled to find an employer willing to hire her as a sewing machine operator. She reported to the New York Herald Tribune in 1946 the following, and it is a direct quote, so she's using language of her era. Quote, "Once after I was hired, the other girls staged a work stoppage. The boss had to let me go. Finally, one boss said he'd give me a chance. I was the only Negro in the shop. Then I found he was paying me less than the others. I didn't complain. I was tired of walking." So at that shop, which was in New York City, she earned $2 less a week than her mostly white coworkers. She didn't complain directly to her boss, but in 1933, she led her coworkers out on an International Ladies Garment Workers Union organized general strike. She was soon elected union chairlady of her shop and continued to make her way up the union ranks until she became the first African-American woman to hold the position of Director of Education for the Local 62. So that's one story we found. Another is a woman whose career unfolded here in Kingston. Mabel was born in Kingston, but this next slide, Pauline Timbrook, was actually born in Virginia, but spent most of her life here in Kingston. And Pauline sewed for both personal and professional purposes. She made a wedding gown for her daughter. She made children's dresses and coats and was especially into making Easter outfits for her family. She was also very proud of her job as a seamstress at Halpern Blouse Manufacturing, which was located above the old bus station in Midtown. It's a position she held for 25 years. In her 2014 obituary, her family noted that, quote, "She was the first Afro-American seamstress to work there. During her tenure, she excelled, and before her retirement, she was promoted to chief sample blouse maker for Halpern." So these stories are vital to understanding both the Black history of Kingston and the story of sewing in Kingston. If you have photos or know of more stories that can help us flesh this out even further, it would be wonderful to hear, whether these are stories of the discrimination or of the successes and the contributions of Black Kingstonians to this industry. So the last photo I want to share is the next slide, which shows the employees of Levine Bag Company. And this was located on Spring Street, which is just across the street from Rear's Bakery. And I included this slide because far after our Sewing in Kingston show, we're going to continue researching and sharing local history of the Rondout. That's our mission. And so we hope to discover many more photos and stories like this one that can help us tell about the many groups who called this neighborhood home and about their relationships with one another. So that is a little bit of the research that 3 of our member institutions are in the midst of. We'll welcome many questions at the end, but for now I want to hand it over to Courtney so that we can pivot to you guys and talk about how you might be involved.
So currently we have a variety of resources that range from oral histories, nonfiction books, presentations, exhibitions, and films, to name a few. So how can you get involved with the project? You can share your resources with the Hudson Valley Black History Collaborative Research Project through our Google Sheet and Google Form. You can help identify people and places in historic images. Do you recognize any of the people shown or named in the photos in this presentation? We'd like to know more about them. If you have a historic photo of the Kingston or Hudson Valley area or photos of family members, we'd be grateful to see them and learn from you. Do you work for an organization that could contribute to our project, or are you a local history enthusiast? We'd appreciate you helping us. You can also help spread the word about the project. Sharing the details of our project with your community network will help bring in valuable resources. We are here to help you. And you can also use the resources for your own research projects. Have you wanted to learn more about your community, notable local historical figures, or perhaps a family member? Or do you have a family story to tell before it gets lost to time? Then our resource can be a great place for you to start. And on the next slide, you will see a photo of what our submission form looks like. And on to the next slide. So we've told you about our project and we've grabbed your interest. What happens next? We collect submissions via the Google form and then organize and add them to our resource spreadsheet. And then at a later date, we'll post the resource guide on the History Alliance of Kingston website and make it available for people to access and use for research. And later on, we plan to present a more finalized version of our resource guide during the Conference on Black History in the Hudson Valley on October 2nd, 2021. And if you would like to submit a proposal for the conference, you can do so by following the link on the screen. And overall, if you'd like to learn more about our project or get involved, you can visit our website at historyallianceofkingston.com and visit our project page titled HV Black History Project. And you can also contact us via email with the address blackhistory@historyallianceofkingston.com. So I think we're going to hand it over and see if anyone has any questions.
Okay, yeah, if anyone has any questions, just go ahead and put them in chat. I see a couple here. I think this first one I'm going to kick to Bill. Bill, how old does something have to be considered historic? What is it that we're looking for?
I'm old enough that I've got history already. You know, if we learned anything on January 6th, and we learned a lot, is that history is what's happening every day. So there's not a time frame. Now, if you come to me, I'm most interested in the historic era of the D&H Canal, at least professionally. Quite honestly, I'm much more interested in a much wider range of history. But so I'm interested to hear stories that people might know of their relatives. And we get these kinds of letters and email all the time, and I collect them because these personal stories are a real window into the past, and I'd love to get more about people of color. I've got some. I did a presentation that's up on our D&H TV YouTube channel that's on the Black experience on the D&H Canal. And so if you're interested in that particular part, but the fact is, history is now. You know, when I was a younger man, you know, World War I seemed too close. Now it's like it was a century ago. The Vietnam War, that's in our history already. And as I say, January 6th, that was historic. And we were all here. We lived that history. So I think history is not just, it is the past like a second ago even.
All right. Rosemary asked, are we interested in stories outside of Ulster County? Sarah Litvin, do you want to take that one?
Sure. The answer is yes. If we're interested, you know, we are called the History Alliance of Kingston because this really started with Kingston institutions, but even that's not even true because the D&H Canal Museum isn't here in Kingston. So, you know, this is
either the Century House Museum or the Ulster County Historical Society.
Exactly. So this is really, you know, it could be massively expansive, but we're going to try to, you know, sort of keep it to the Hudson Valley. But we want as much, you know, we can contact colleagues at institutions anywhere if folks have stories that they want to share or contribute.
Yeah, and we already have some resources on our list that are from like Dutchess County, from Westchester County, from Orange County. So that's, you know, we kind of wanted to expand the scope beyond just Kingston because we felt like we didn't want to overlook stories. And also historically, Kingston was really connected to the rest of the valley. So a lot of those stories will probably overlap.
And we may be able to find out information about Kingstonians from the information that we get because they moved around for work opportunities, for housing opportunities, etc. This will be going on for a very long time.
Righting a serious wrong isn't done overnight. This is permanent, hopefully. At least that's our hope.
And I'd also like to add that people probably have a lot of the history that they don't even know that they have. I imagine, you know, hat boxes and shoe boxes at the top of the closet, old photo albums, etc. We encourage people, and as Sarah L. said earlier, it's not about giving us your stuff, but it's about informing the project by allowing us to look at the photographs, identify people, and follow the breadcrumbs.
Ward asked, what do we know about the industrial history of Ellenville and Napanoch and the involvement of Black people? I don't know who wants to take that one. Ward, I know in the archives, the only thing I think we would have is census records that would show where they're employed, but that's part of what we're trying to answer. A lot of these questions we have we don't really know much yet. That's what we're working on. Does anyone else have anything to add about Ellenville and Napanoch?
Well, there is, I think of the D&H Canal as being a big part of the industrial history of Ellenville and Napanoch, since it supplied, despite the fact that the D&H Canal Company was a coal company, it had this outsized effect on our country. And certainly in the area that it traversed from Honesdale, Pennsylvania to the round out on the Hudson, it developed the industries along it. It gave them a means. So the cement industry and leather and plaster and wood products, agricultural products, bluestone, all of these industries were allowed to develop because they had affordable transportation. I do know of a Black story in Ellenville through the great Dorothy Hurlbut Sanderson, who worked at the Ellenville Library and did a lot of great primary source research, wrote a book on the D&H Canal. And in her book, we find out about Black Fred. And the reason we know about him is that the great painter Edward Lamson Henry did a drawing of him. He was let's see if I'll get this right. He was a hunchback, a dwarf, a trout guide, a canaller, and he was unfortunately known for having been murdered by another person of color, a story that made the New York Times. And I'm trying to get, the only picture I have of it right now is a very sketchy one in Dorothy Sanderson's book. But I'm in contact with the Ellenville Library. I'm hoping I can find about a bit more about him. We were fortunate that Edward Lamson Henry painted him, and that he had a little bit of a history on the back. And then as I was doing my research, I uncovered the New York Times story about Black Fred having been murdered.
Lorna asks, what are the current resources for data about slavery in the Hudson Valley and freed Black families? Is there a database?
Certainly not that I know of. Of course, we've got Susan Styson Cohn's excellent book that's just a compilation of runaway slave ads, but that's at least a data point and a spot where you can get the names of some of these individuals.
Yeah.
Also, we have A.J. Williams Meyer's book and collection of essays, Long Hammering, as a resource. And I think A.J. actually has submitted some data points for the collaborative project. They just maybe haven't been updated into the documents yet.
Michael
We have
Groff.
a digital, in the Ulster County Archives, we have a digital collection. It's not even a collection, but it's a slave census from the early 1700s, 1727, I think. So if you go on our website and shoot me an email, I can share that with you, but that's all that I know about, really.
Well, in Michael Groff's book, I'm trying to figure out the name of it, but he wrote a book on slavery in Dutchess County, but that's still the Hudson Valley.
There's also Phillipsburg Manor, historic Hudson Valley has, or Phillips Manor, I always get the two of them confused. They have a huge project that they did about slavery in the Hudson Valley and the Underground Railroad. There's also the Underground Railroad project in Albany, and I believe Fort Craylo State Historic Site in Albany has a list of a database of enslaved people that were in the Albany area, but I don't think there is one for the whole Hudson Valley.
I was just going to chime in that I know that there's a slave census of 1755 for Kingston that might be a resource for some folks. And I also know that a lot of how we track down individuals is unfortunately through probate inventories and last wills and testament. Because slaves were considered as property, they were passed down from generation to generation. And so those enslaved persons appear in those inventories and last wills and testaments. So that's just another option.
Yeah, and we also in the archives have a collection of manumission records for when enslaved peoples were freed. I don't think any serious scholarship has been done on them that I know about, so we don't have a database necessarily yet, but we do have that. Let's see, Sarah Livin, maybe you can help with this question. Are there any projects in need of a breakthrough of sorts? What are the sources most needed currently?
Oh my goodness. I don't know if I can answer that one, but I could answer one of the other ones that I saw in here. Can I pull a different one, or do you want to stick with that
Sure,
one?
go for it. No, I mean, That's a big question.
It's a big question, and I am one of the newer historians to this area, so I think you, Taylor, would be the right person to answer that. But I think I have something to say about this question. Chester asked about oral histories, and also that Evelyn was asking, is anyone connecting with the Black churches on the Strand? New Central is on the Strand, or Skylar, pastor of Riverview Baptist, has photos from her childhood at New Central. And I'm really excited that actually I'm going to be connecting with and reaching out to the Black churches, as well as the many other churches in the Rondout neighborhood, as a part of a program that we're doing on March 14th, Rear Rolls Revival, which is bringing together the many different communities who picked up their Sunday morning rolls or got bread during the week from Rear's Bakery. And it was really a church story. After church on Sundays, folks would come and pick up their rolls. And so as a part of that project and a part of having former customers come and do a taste test panel, I'm going to be collecting several oral histories from folks who, I've heard enjoyed Rear's Bakery, including several folks who are parts of those churches downtown. In terms of an oral history project,
1727, I think.
Church story after church on Sundays, which I got some feedback there, but there was an oral history project Chester asked about, and that's one of the things that the History Alliance of Kingston sort of initially said, oh my goodness, there are so many great stories out there in Kingston, how are we going to collect them? And right now we're an all volunteer group of folks who are working for different institutions, and so one of the things that we have kind of on our radar as we move forward is, will there be some sort of more robust infrastructure for this project, money that could lead to staff, all of those kinds of things. So these are questions that we have. Doing an oral history collecting project is a big undertaking. You need to transcribe it. You need to, properly catalog it and come up with good cataloging terms, not the ones that, as Sarah Wasberg Johnson, have been used for too long at institutions. So yes, and we've got a lot of work to do. But I want to know what other folks thought about that history of where we need a breakthrough. I mean, there's so many places we need a breakthrough.
I think a lot of our institutions could use help tracking down census data, because that can be a very time-consuming job. But I know a number of us have names of people and maybe some dates or where they worked, but not necessarily, we don't know anything else about them. So if you are a professional or amateur genealogist who would like to help us out, help us track people down, I think that would be super useful, because once we have that identifying data, that can really help us find people and learn more about their stories. I am also just going to interject that Ashley Hobart-Biagini, who is the co-author of In Defiance with Susan Sesson-Cohen, is on the conference right now. She's here with us, and she said she is working on a database of enslaved and free people, and also working on the AME Zion Church in New Paltz. So whoever said they were interested in the database, you should direct message Ashley, who has messaged us in the chat.
And, I was just thinking about the question too. And in a way, the point of tonight's session is to say, you folks out there know what the big questions are, what breakthroughs we need, because we don't know enough of the stories to know what's important. And so I'm hoping that through this collaborative research guide, and I hope that you will submit your ideas. There's already been so much great stuff in the chat. That we'll find out where we need to direct our attention, and then help, students and other researchers who contact us to say, go look at this. This is important and nobody's studied it yet.
I also would like to point out that we also want to gather information that's happening now so that it is not lost to history. So people aren't sitting here 150 years going, so Kingston in 2021, what was going on? So hopefully we can have, the African Roots Center, for example, we had to stop it because of the pandemic, but we were doing slowly getting oral histories together. It was stories from the streets, people who had been born and raised in Kingston, worked, married, had children, etc. but just talking about what they did in their ordinary life, because at some future point, that's going to fill in gaps for other people.
Absolutely. And I would just say too, yeah, that we need people either that have stories, that have things to share, but also people that are just interested in it to start looking into some of these older documents. Like in the archives, and probably every archives on the planet, we don't know exactly what we have. Our job is to maintain it and, you know, make exhibits, but really cater to researchers. So we don't sit there going through the records all day doing the scholarship. That's what researchers are for. So yeah, send me an email. We can schedule an appointment once COVID is a little further down the road. But yeah, we have a lot to go through and a lot of work to do. There's a question here for Sarah Wasberg Johnson. Let's see. What is the conference on Black history in the Hudson Valley, and what kind of proposals are you looking for?
Thanks, that's a great question. So we did the first conference on Black history in the Hudson Valley. It was the Maritime Museum and the A.J. Williams Myers African Roots Center collaborating. And we hosted it at the Maritime Museum. We had concurrent sessions. We had proposals from all over the Hudson Valley. You know, could be as short as a little 20-minute presentation or like 45-minute lecture. It was super awesome. We meant to do another one in 2019, kind of got derailed. And then of course, 2020, like the whole world got derailed. So we've postponed it now until the fall, and we'll be doing a hybrid version. Hopefully we'll be able to have in person, but regardless, we are going to be doing a virtual conference concurrently. And basically anybody can submit their original research as a proposal, so long as it is about Black history within the confines of the Hudson Valley, which for us includes New York City and the Capital District, because the Maritime Museum, we're all about the Hudson River, so we identify the valley based on where the river goes. But yeah, it's just an opportunity for the museum. You know, we're all volunteers for HACC, and we're one of the bigger museums in the region, although maybe not so much anymore after the pandemic. But we wanted to provide a platform for people to be able to share these stories and the research. So I'm hoping that this collaborative research project will help researchers do more of the research, find more of the sources they need, maybe find archival resources that are not maybe well described or well defined currently, maybe find community sources that, you know, only the families that hold them know about, and just get the stories out there is our goal. So to that end, I am actually going to drop, because I realize it's not on our website right now. I'm going to see if I can drop the link to the submission form. So everybody who is here can go and fill it out if they want to. So
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah.
Here's a nice little short.
Perfect. Sarah Litvin again, maybe you can answer this one. When will the guide be available to the public?
So we were so excited to get ready for tonight. We'd been reaching out to scholars and folks who'd written books on this topic to gather their input. And now we're reaching out to the broader public to gather yours. So it's never going to be complete, but we want to be able to sort of pull all this stuff together and organize and synthesize it over the next couple of weeks or maybe months in our weekly meetings as an organization. And then we'll put it on our website on the historyallianceofkingston.com. So it will continue to be a work in progress, and we don't have an exact date yet, but we just hope that folks will contribute to it. And I think that the goal, you know, it's always good to have goals and deadlines. And so the Black History Month, the Black History Conference that Sarah Wasberg Johnson was talking about seems like a really great sort of next step as a check-in with our community, you know, to keep all of us working together and moving forward on it. As Troy Allen said, this is the very beginning of a project that is going to last a very long time. And so we were just so excited to have this opportunity. And I do want to thank Black History Month Kingston for including us as a part of this larger project. And they too are a huge part of the process of recovering and sharing all of the Black history of Kingston and beyond. And so, you know, we've got steps and we'll keep building.
I think I'm out of questions in the chat. Bill, did you have any questions on the Facebook side?
Not a one, just some chatter.
Does anyone else have anything they would like to add? Or I know I'd like to thank Dennis and Alan for sharing these links. Those are awesome. And if I missed your question, please just post it again, because from my account, I'm out.
And Evelyn Clark also put in some resources, comments. We'll be saving the chat so we can go back to it, which are things that many of us probably forget about, because the obvious sources in our quest to find the unknown resources that we don't know about. But I think that there's a great deal of continuity. I mean, when I think about the old mule barn that Ben Wigfall had in Pankaki, and now another artist, Andrew Light, is living in it and, you know, creating art. So there's sort of a continuity right there. And at some point in the future, another artist may be in that, and it'll be a wonderful story of the Kingston, you know, community, and particularly the neighborhood of Pankaki.
Yeah, Neil, give me 1 second and I'll share that link with you. I'm just pulling it up now.
Neil was asking about the Pankaki scavenger hunt. Yeah, so everybody, if you go to the website historyallianceofkingston.com, there's a lot of resources up there for the scavenger hunts. There's the link to, if you are a heritage organization and want to join us, there's a link to join there. And then I don't think it's up yet, but I'm hoping that Henry will put it up soon, the link to the Google submission form, which I also dropped in the chat. So if you have resources that you've mentioned here in the chat, or that you haven't mentioned that you think should go in the guide, please use that Google form link and submit them so we can add them.
And Alan asked us to post a list of the people who are presenting in their organizations. I think that can be easily found at the History Alliance of Kingston website, and links to our web pages. And some of us have some content that would be considered relevant. Certainly the Maritime Museum in my organization.
And we really, you know, this is a sincere request for feedback, for, you know, direction, who to turn to, what topics, you know, I mean, that really was the perfect question. The point is, you know, yes, we are the historians, but that doesn't mean we know what the most important things to study are. And so what are they? If you can tell us, if you can share with us, we have a special email address just for this project, and maybe somebody can throw it. Aha, thank you, Henry. It's blackhistory@historyallianceofkingston.com. And so we really hope you'll use that, and you can, you know, get that email address right on our website as well. And we'll just really look forward to getting this conversation and this project moving even further forward. Anyone have any last thoughts or questions? Well, thank you to you all so much for coming. Thank you to all of my wonderful colleagues for, you know, working on this project together. We really are just so glad to spend this time together.
And I also think that we're all learning from each other, and that's important.
I've got to say, one of the real joys of HAC is getting to know my colleagues and having this opportunity to work together. It's really been too much fun, if there is such a thing.
Yeah, certainly one of the only silver linings during COVID, but bringing all of these different organizations together. I know from the clerk's office has been, it's a long time coming.
I was just going to say the same thing, Taylor, that, you know, a lot of us are working from home. So it's nice to be able to check in and collaborate with other people on projects like this.
I just would, Taylor, if you could repeat the piece you put up for Black History Month, because I think what's interesting about it is that the man not only played baseball, but that he owned a business and a home.
Yeah, I'm pulling the link up now. That was one of the surprising things we found too. We were researching him because we knew that he was a barber. And as we were doing our research, we learned that he was also one of the first baseball players in America, but that he bought property, yeah, was something like within 20 years after being freed as being born an enslaved person. So he really is an inspiring story. Enough so that the Daily Freeman did a full-page interview of him in the 1880s, and he was certainly a relatively prominent local figure. And then you can't really find anything else about him for almost the next 100 years. So I think this is something common too that happens. Things get lost to history and they have to be uncovered. I'm sharing the link to the exhibit now. Really a great story. I'm glad we were able to share it.
I'm also going to add the link in the chat to anyone who's interested to the Maritime Museum's history blog and our Black History category, which has a bunch of recent posts, including the 2 blog posts about Fanny Anthony and the Black Glee Clubs, the Mary Powell and Thomas Cornell. So obviously these are all going to be on the guide, but we thought since you're here, we might as well share.
Yeah, and Kevin, email me. I did not know that he had a connection to the Pine Street Burial Ground. That's why things like this are so great. Oh, that's awesome.
So this project is already bearing fruit. All right.
Yeah, I've already gotten an email from someone on our brand new email address. So we're making progress.
So thanks to you that are already starting to participate. This is what we hoped would happen. It's very gratifying.
And just for all our historical organizations, I see Dennis posted in the chat that the National Park Service has a current grant program to survey and inventory historic properties related to underdocumented communities. And then he posted the grant link. So thank you, Dennis, because as you probably know, a lot of museums and historical societies, grants can really make a big difference in our programming. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, since I started it, I guess I have to end it, though I don't want to go. This has been really lovely to spend this time with everyone. So it's not goodbye, but it's let's keep going. And thanks so much for being a part of this tonight.